Karim, hi. Who are you?
Hello, hello. Thank you, Dean. It's a pleasure to be here. I am a fractional CMO. I come from a background, unlike probably most CMOs. I come from a very agency strategy background.
Hmm.
And that gave me an opportunity to work with a lot of recognized Fortune 500 brands. And work closely with CMOs. And I sort of took that forward now, working with startups and mid-sized companies, helping them get to some sort of that world-class level that I've been exposed to.
Well, thank you for being here, by the way. Nice to see you again. Um, I've got some questions. They're a bit wide ranging, but I think you might have some fun with them. And one of them is before we talk about industries or whatever, the economy or whatever, I want to talk about being a fractional CMO. Like, how has finding clients changed over the last year or two for fractional CMOs? Or how do you think it's going to change in the next year? What's it going to be like in 2025?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Now, I think to answer that, what I would say is, what is this beast of fractional CMOs? I
Yeah.
mean, like where did it come from? I mean, maybe it's a thing I'm only seeing now because, once you've started to gray your hair and, get into a 20-year experience, you get exposed to these kind of things. And maybe I'm only seeing it now. But I think my own exposure to it was coming from the startup world. I felt like,
Hmm.
how, when you're doing startups, you want to have the best in class people, but you can't afford to pay them, and then you have some sort of a fractional role where, you can get that expertise and most of the time, at least in my experience, has been like you may not necessarily get paid, but you get some sort of equity and so on. So in that context, how do you think it will change going forward?
Yeah, finding clients. It's like a key part, right? When you're out on
Yes,
your own.
yes. I think it gets to, I mean, I read somewhere, and when it comes to the B2B services, regardless of whatever it is, fractional CMO is another kind of service that you offer, right? And has been to do with, you know, being top of mind. Like the when people make a
Right.
decision to work with a consultant, or a fractional CMO, you already got to be in their radar. It was like the whole case was really against, like paid media, like performance marketing as you have, right, does not work in the service sector so much. Like the people who want to make a
Yeah.
decision already have their choices in their minds. So your goal therefore then is to be in their radar over building that rapport, through content and visibility. And I think pretty much what you're doing, I think this with this platform, really, it helps to stay on top of mind of all the people relevant to you, and therefore you're in the consideration set. So I think that fundamental will not change so much. I think what will probably change is based on some of the economic aspects, the kind of companies that are going to come up.
Right.
Like for example, like post pandemic, there was this whole surge of on demand delivery, because it was changing retail because of everything being shuttered and
Hmm.
everything being to e-com. I mean, that's how I got an opportunity, end up with a on demand startup, which I would never have done, but it was that dynamic. So I think similarly as things evolve, today it's been all about AI. So if you're sort of already got a head start in AI, then maybe that's where it will be. So right now, I think that's probably the headwinds are really in that space between now and, I think as AI continues to evolve, I think that's where the opportunities will be. And the fundamental process will still continue to be the same. So it's just about how you continue to make yourself relevant.
Right.
That's another part of it.
I can tell you, uh, a year ago, if you went to LinkedIn and just searched for the phrase in quotes fractional CMO, there were about 1,800 fractional CMOs in all of LinkedIn worldwide. And I checked today, and it's reached 7,000 in a year. So like two and a half times growth. That's like a lot of people are now fractional CMOs, or a lot of people now call themselves fractional CMOs. But that's a tremendous amount of growth for a very specific job description and title in just
It
a
is.
year. In fact, it's grown so much that I said when I was on LinkedIn, I said, okay, 7,000. I clicked on the little one to see like how many are I'm connected to. I'm connected to 1,800. I'm connected to as many fractional CMOs as there actually were a year ago. right?
Wow.
And so that's how much it's grown. That I'm like, apparently, I'm connected like 24% of all the fractional CMOs on LinkedIn. Oh my. Okay.
Amazing.
David, hi.
Hi.
Uh, David, tell folks a little bit about you, and then what kind of like shifts or changes do you think are happening in how fractional CMOs find clients this year or next year?
Sure. So I'm David Harold. I am a fractional CMO, one of those 7,000. I came up on the agency side. So I was in
Sure.
integrated agencies, and then I spent 25 years in-house at a tech company called Imagination Technologies.
Yeah.
I've been on my own for a while now, and I'm mainly called in by tech firms, startups, and scale-ups. They make something complicated and they need to convince people to buy it instead of building it themselves.
Right.
And I guess, the part of the answer to your question is in that introduction. So I am mainly called in by my clients.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do a lot of marketing to find those clients. It's pretty much all word of mouth. I was tempted to put something on my website with a little percentage saying how much of my time is occupied, because one of the things I do think about a lot at the minute is how many people come to me and say, can we do something? And I say no, and how that then, affects a future relationship or whatever else. And of course, how to scale as a fractional CMO. It is still a business. And, you're sort of thinking about, well, where does this go? How can it go? So I guess the answer to your question is probably in that, how do people find me? Why do they find me? And it's through content, it's through LinkedIn, it's somebody doing a search, it's somebody asking for a referral, it's people who are exposed to more high profile things that you do within your networking. So I did a lot of stuff around the UK semiconductor strategy, and
Mm-hmm.
that gets me known to semiconductor companies. And I'm involved with incubators with, Silicon Catalyst and Chipstart UK, which is the government incubator. And people know of me because of that. They, see me at events or whatever else. And then they come to me when they have the problem that they think I solve. So I just put some effort into making sure that people do actually know which problem I solve. And then hopefully it all works itself out.
There you go. Okay, then. So let's talk about changes and what's happening these days. Okay. So, David, like, what, if any, sort of shifts in marketing strategy are we seeing like right now and into next year? Do you think, like, what's been changing that's based on politics and the economy, and a lot of things are sort of in flux right now? How's that
I
affecting marketing?
Yeah. I mean, I like that economy one actually,
Mm-hmm.
because sort of, it's very much my belief that people should focus on account-based marketing, that people should try and go as direct to their clients or customers as they possibly can, that the majority of mediation, you should avoid it if you can avoid
Yeah.
it. And marketing sort of historically has got a bit of reputation for building these gin palaces. I don't know, maybe that's a British phrase, I'm not sure. These sort of
It is definitely a British phrase.
these
I don't know what it means.
floating ornamental boats and yachts and whatever that
Mm-hmm.
stay in the marina, and people go on them in the marina for a drink and don't ever sail anywhere. And they're a pretty expensive way to go, hey, I've got a yacht.
Mm-hmm.
And marketing sort of tends towards those things. Let's have the biggest possible stand that we can have at a trade show, and whatever else it is. And the economy has kind of forced people to reconsider that and push them in the direction of the kind of marketing strategy that I favor, which is, let's find out about the customer, let's work out where they are, let's go on the shortest possible line to deliver our messages to them. If I can enable a salesperson to just go in with some messages, that's perfect. If we have to go beyond that, then I start with, VIP events or direct content, newsletters. I love a newsletter, especially if it's signed by the CEO. So those kinds of things I think are really working out. And I like that, it pushes budgets down, it pushes effectiveness up. So I'm pretty happy. I'm pretty happy with that. And also I'm pretty happy with the fact that as a fractional CMO, people who maybe in the glory days of VC money pouring into their businesses would have just gone and hired a CMO
Yeah.
and now going, Oh, how should I tackle the
Yeah.
problem of marketing? To which fractional is a really good answer.
Someone asked me a couple weeks ago. Really, he's a really smart guy. I love talking to him. His name is Chip Royce, and he's really great on the strategy side. And he just happened to ask me, Dean, like almost all of my business, and we don't really talk about this normally on the podcast, but like the vast majority of my businesses revenue comes via fractional CMOs, which is to say, like they bring me in. All fractional CMOs have a Rolodex of specialists, right? And, on any given project, you maybe don't need your SEO guy this time, but you do need your graphics lady, and I'm one of those specialists, right? Very specialized. And he says, "Are you worried that this whole fractional CMO thing is just kind of like a bubble and it's going to pop?" And I said, on the one hand, anything that grows too fast can pop. On the other, do I think the gigification of the economy is going to stop? No, I don't. I don't think companies are going to switch back to only wanting full-time employees. That's kind of not a thing. All right, so Kareem, so basically the same question, right? Uh, are you seeing any shifts in marketing strategy among companies these days, this year and maybe into next year, based on how things are shifting in the economy or sentiment?
I think, yeah, building on what David said, I think yes, there has been, I think, a change in dynamics. On from, let's say, the classical approach, integrated approach, when you need to do the shiny new thing, like kind of approach, to very performance driven. How can I really get the maximum, ROAS, on my spend? Like what is so? I think because of digitization of things, I think there's something we've been seeing, for a while. I think the only difference that I see now is a little bit of a convergence of those two schools. It's like there was this one, you've got to do your TV, your emotional, you got to do all of that. But then at the same time, there's this whole school of, okay, it's all about, performance marketing, conversion driven work. I think as everyone smartens up, that human element, I think, becomes fundamental. And
Right.
I think I come from that school, that Daniel Kahneman, 95% of decisions are emotional and subconscious. So the idea of adding that layer of emotion to performance marketing, is really where I come from. So I think is, yes, people, buy because you have mental availability, so you have some sort of an emotional reservoir. So I think doing that work, especially as things get super competitive, will be needed to be
Right.
layered on before you can really get to that conversion stuff, because
You
there's
think
just so
things are
much.
about to become super competitive?
Well,
Is
I
it not
think that,
super competitive already?
well,
Some
Bill,
CEOs going, "Oh my god, I hope he's wrong about that. It's so hard right now."
I think the economic aspect really is what I mean. I think competition is always there, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
think it's just the nature of it. Let's say if you're in a tight economic times, the nature of competition changes, is because, like, okay, then who's going to win in all of this tighter space? But when things are going well, then there's so many new players, then there's a different dynamic. So I think the competitive dynamic tends to always remain. I think it's just the context sort of changes, and
Hmm.
who wins within that context. It really comes down to that, right? So and I think that's where marketing can make a difference. And maybe I'm jumping ahead, but I
Well,
think,
let's talk about that and sort of the making the difference thing, and then we're going to go back to David because I want to ask him the
yes,
same question, right? So things making a difference, it's always tempting in every organization to start thinking marketing as like a collection of tools or tactics, right? And this is not a question about strategy; it's a little different than that. Things come into favor and things fall out of favor. Like, what do you think right now? Companies or a lot of companies are doing or thinking about, and it's overrated. Or if you want, what's sort of underrated right now? If you're
yeah,
listening to this podcast, like, oh, that's like, oh yeah, a lot of people haven't thought about that or haven't done that in a while. I might want to go back to that. Like, what's sort of underrated or overrated?
I think if I were to put it very simply,
Hmm.
what's underrated is actually talking to the audience you really want to convert. in this very digitized, numbers driven game, you tend to really forget about, the fundamentals. So we have so much data about our consumers. We know so much about their usage and everything, but do you really know the people behind the brand? And I think, and what that means is that translates into is research. So outside of, let's say, I work with, let's say, the Nestle's and the PepsiCos of the world still, and then I see that some of those best practices in marketing, like if you take the fractional CMO, the best marketers in the world, right? I mean, what are they doing, right? I mean, fractional is because you work with
Mm-hmm.
smaller companies, but if you really look at what the big guys are doing, I think that's something they've really perfected. Some of the tools I'm seeing now in terms of how you do research, yes, it was the focus group before, and whatnot, but now there are these call boards, there are these communities you create, which you engage with your audiences over 3 days. And I've read some of the stuff from, Nestle in Europe, and it's just phenomenal, the depth of understanding that you get and the kind of effort put into that, and how that then translates into really engaging them, at an emotional level. So I think that is probably what I feel is underrated from majority, just because of obviously budgetary constraints, because these sort of thing is expensive, and people just tend to overlook that.
David, what do you
Yeah.
think? What sort of concepts or tools or strategies are underrated right now?
Um, I'm gonna go with a kind of like bad data,
Mm-hmm.
small data. So everybody talks about big data, and there's such huge access to it, and incredible tools for aggregating it. And, and I'm not opposed to having lots of data available, but actually I think focus groups, talking to the customer, finding out what your salespeople or your sales support people have heard. These
Mm-hmm.
little things that people are like, oh, that's anecdotal. I don't really know. Does that tell me anything apart from about that individual? I think I really like that kind of data. I think I like, hearing from the customer, because even if all that happens is you do more business with that one customer that you listen to, that repeat business is easier than finding, new business, always easier. And so I think, look at the right kind of data. It doesn't just have to be, big aggregated data. Let's throw an AI at this. I think actually just, sort of, oh, when I went to visit the customer, I heard that data should rise to the top much easier than it does.
So, I mean, so I want to follow up on that then. So, what sort of, you're seeing now? What kind of like common mistakes are you seeing companies are making around their marketing and market strategy? Like, what do you like? You're talking to people, and it's like, oh man, like, why would they try that? Why would they even? Why?
Um, I think so I work with a number of startups,
Mm-hmm.
and I work with sort of small to medium enterprises. I mean, some of them are listed, but they're not household name kind of companies. And I think what I find is that people kind of they read things, they get this sense that there's a lot of marketing that you must do. I must do advertising, or
Right.
whatever it is.
I
I
have
don't
to
know.
do digital. I have to do
I have
social. I have to.
I have to do all these things. But no, the only thing you have to do is the most effective thing to fill
Mm-hmm.
up your business to the point where actually you don't need to do any more marketing right now, because and I think people miss that. They miss the fact that marketing should be simple. Marketing strategy should be simple. Your business strategy is there to define everything that your business does. Your marketing strategy really should just come in and go, okay, how do I create conversion? And what is the easiest way that I create that conversion? How quickly do I go to it? And I think people miss that. They come from, I'm, I'm probably going to offend like either somebody on this call or certainly somebody watching. But you get a lot of people who come in with quite good knowledge about what the possibilities of marketing are. They've done an MBA or whatever it is.
Right.
But actually, they haven't suffered through those years of being on the coalface and your budget being reduced, and oh no, it's 2008, I have no money. Those types of situations which really sort of push you down to what is going to work. And I think that's what people miss. That's what a lot of companies miss. And you should come in, and the first thing you should do is look at the budget. And if the budget is huge, then the whole philosophy of marketing is wrong, I
Right.
think.
Okay, so this is for you both, right? We can start with David and then switch to Karim. So, at some point, part of your responsibilities for being like fractional head of marketing at some company or a number of companies at a time, right, is at some point the team needs to be built out a little bit. It's missing a skill set. You need someone. What's the hardest part? We'll start with David on this. What's the hardest part of finding the right person to hire into a marketing team right now?
So right now, I feel, we're in this really weird situation where there's a lot of availability in the market, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have lost their jobs, particularly in tech. So, it's not that hard to put a job up and get a lot of applicants.
Right.
And I don't know that I love that, because people are just in need of a job, and, they're applying for a lot of different things. I sort of feel like, even with relatively small teams, the best thing you can do is headhunt. You should go and say, does anybody know someone?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know someone who'd be good for this role? I'd like to hear about them. And I would much prefer to hire somebody that comes from in my network and is recommended to me than, go through 150 CVs or get an AI to go through 150 CVs, whatever it is. So I think that is a weird thing at the moment, that there's so many people out there. Working out who you should get is quite hard. You've got to be proactive, I think.
And Karim, what do you think? What's the hardest part about finding like a great person to add to a marketing team right now?
Yeah, what's crazy is, like, as you said, like, looking at the whole situation, right? There's so many people looking for jobs, right? And yet every day I come across a situation where it's like, we don't know who to get for this role. You know what I mean? Which is crazy. So I don't know why it's not being solved, or
It's like being thirsty in an ocean.
Yes, it blows my. I mean, I literally had someone, like, okay, we need this person for this role. I was just ending a fractional role, and someone needed to sort of operationalize it, and I couldn't find a single person, like, in my network, that I could just say, you know what, this is that person. So I think that is an ongoing challenge. And if I look back at my own career, and honestly, if I think about it, every single job, right, maybe up to the last, I mean, every single job was some sort of a referral,
Right.
or someone who knew someone who just, introduced me, and therefore it happened, and so I think maybe that's what it comes down to. I think it's just who you know, and that's probably seems to be the only way to solve it. And I think.
All right. So I have one more question for you guys, and then we'll have to wind down. So Karim, like, what, if anything, you don't have to say anything you don't want to. What, if anything, are you excited about marketing wise for 2025? What's new or interesting, or that's fun. That should be fun. Anything?
I mean, I think it's hard. I mean, it'd probably be the obvious thing. Like, probably everyone says that now, I guess. But it's just, I'm excited about AI, honestly. I think, I am exploring it actively, and I'm loving what it's doing. I think it's making me better, and a lot of things in terms of making me more efficient and effective. It's almost like I treat AI like a Harvard grad level, employee that I pay $20 a month to, who just bounce off ideas and thinking and whatnot. You know what I mean? And from a startup point of view, I'm actually been using, like things like Midjourney and whatnot, exploring from visual side of things for my presentations, and and so many things. It's creating impact. So I'm excited about where this goes. And I'm happy to ride that wave. I mean, I'm loving it.
David, how about you? What, if anything, are you excited about for 2025?
Well, I'm going to say AI, but I'm going to come at it from the other side. So what I'm actually very interested in, and I genuinely do not yet know how to exploit, is the fact that there are, Google's just launched 2 new AI crawlers that are going out there looking for data. You can tell when you do a search, or ask a question in Perplexity or whatever, you find stuff coming back about your clients, or about yourself. And that is very interesting. How do you affect that search in the same way that we've done with SEO and SEM and whatever? And to some extent, there's that the fundamentals are there, because AI is going out and it is sort of crawling in the same way that Google or Bing or whatever else is. But there are clearly starting to be differentiators in what AI is looking for, how it's looking for it, the kind of authenticity and expertise that it's trying to tease out, particularly things like Perplexity. As a search engine, that is trying to sound like it's an incredibly clever, Harvard grad, as Karim put it. So how can we influence that? I think that is going to be a big thing as we start to crack that problem. Whoever cracks it first actually probably going to make a lot of money. I should have kept it to myself, but I'm very interested in that.
Well, if it's any consolation, this episode won't air for several months, so you have some time. Okay, so David, who should be reaching out to you these days, and how do you want them to connect to you?
So I work mostly with technology startups. They can reach out to me at davidharrell.com. I am about 85, maybe even 90% occupied, so it depends what they want. But I would love to hear from people who, maybe have a problem with their marketing, something they really want to look for a solution to, something that we could work on together. And David at davidharrell.com. The big ego.
Karim?
It's just all David Harold,
All David Harrell. And then Kareem, how about you? Who should be reaching out to you these days, and what's the best way?
Yeah, I think I come from a very food and beverage kind of, CPG background, so
Mm-hmm.
anything which is in the food retail space is obviously something it's close to my heart and enjoy always working and doing. Uh, but yeah, closer to that on-demand retail and some of the tech, faces of that evolution of that category, I think is where I come in. In terms of reaching me out, I think, yeah, inside of Menace, that's sort of my public face. I've evolved from my blog to it's so I still do a majority of my time while 100% full. It's still majority is consulting, sort of, kind of a thing with some fractional work. So yeah, open to always networking, connecting.
All right. All right, guys. Thank you so much. This has been really instructive for me, and this is my favorite kind of episode. It's when I learn a lot. So thanks, David, and thanks.